There. Oh, well. That's okay. Oh, here. It's no. Thank you. All right. I kind of like to walk around. Keeps me awake. So this old schwa guy, he steps back, and he looks at my feet, he looks at my head, he scans my whole body, and he's very short, and he steps up right next to me, and in my face he says, "You're dying." And that's good, because the schwa believe in reincarnation. And I think he figured life just about bad enough for me. Here I am trying to form credit and savings co-ops. I can't speak the language. I don't know how to use a blowgun. I'm done for in this world. And at that point, I think I started crying. So he looks at me again and he says, "Geez, maybe you're not ready. In which case, I can heal you tonight." Got my attention, you know. So that night he did. I had a classic shamanic journey, a shamanic healing experience. And during that time, I learned that what I saw is I'm in this deep experience. He's not communicating with me in any language. There's music being played, but it's this deep experience. And what I saw is that growing up where I did in rural New Hampshire, over 300 years of Yankee Calvinists, we ate very boring food, not like you get here in Mexico, and very hygienic. You wash your hands all the time. Well, now I'm living with the schwa. They've never seen a bar of soap, and they never drink water. They know the rivers are filled with our organic matter, and we're talking about bringing some of these technologies from Caminos de Agua there. They drink something called chicha. It's a kind of a beer made from the manioc root, and women chew it and spit it. And then it ferments, and then you can mix water with it. Spit beer. And I was drinking a lot of spit beer because you got to rehydrate in the Amazon, and there wasn't any Perrier. And I was drinking a lot of squirming white grubs that you pull out of a rotten log and down the hatch because there weren't any Cliff Bars. On this shamanic journey, I saw that every time I was eating these things or drinking this spit beer, a voice was over my shoulder saying, "Son, it'll kill you." And at the same time, I saw that the schwa people were really healthy. The men are all built like Tarzan. They carry, they go into the forest and they kill wild boars, 300 pounds or something, and carry them out. And the women, well, I was in my early 20s. The women looked very good. People live to be very old if they're not killed in an accident, a hunting accident or a canoe accident or something. And so that night on that shamanic journey, what I saw was that the food, the chicha wasn't killing me. It was a mindset. It was a story that I had bought into. And that was the hugest experience of my life, perhaps until today. And after that, a couple of days later, the old shaman comes back up to me with the school teacher, and he looks at me and says, "You're healed. You owe me." And his requirement was that I become his apprentice, which in those days, today that's a cool thing, right, be a shaman's apprentice. But in those days, having just graduated from business school, and it required a year of some very abstaining from lots of things there in the jungle. But it saved my life. And becoming his apprentice had a huge impact. And one of the most important things I learned was that the story is everything. Mindset. It's everything. The story. What we believe, there's two realities, really. There's the reality of the food that I was eating. And then there's another reality, what we call imaginary reality, which is revolved around what that food would do to me or not do to me. And I've recently been studying this quite a bit, that human beings, apparently, Homo sapiens, were the only animals on this planet, we're the only living life forms that have an imaginary reality. It's what gives us borders. There's no such thing as Mexico, except as we've created it, imagined it, and codified it into law. Religion, culture, it's all this imagined reality. It sets us apart. It also means, from a shamanic standpoint, that it's very easy to change it. And so that's where we are today. And the prophecies of all these indigenous cultures, there's so many prophecies, the Mayan prophecy of 2012, the Andean prophecy of the condor and the eagle, the Himalayan prophecy of the 14th Dalai Lama, the Hindu prophecy, the Jewish prophecy, the Christian prophecy. There's so many prophecies, and they all tell us that we have entered a period of time right now, you're born into it, where human beings have the opportunity to rise out of an old system based on brutality, on exploitation, on materialism, and enter a new time that's really going to alter the human presence on this planet. It's going to create an environmentally sustainable, socially just, spiritually fulfilling human presence on this planet. Or we have the opportunity, but you have to do it. We have to be the ones to do it. The prophecies tell us that. And so we're right now in this very difficult time. And the reason, as I mentioned, that I wrote Confessions of an Economic, the new Confessions of an Economic Hitman, is because since the first book was published in 2004, things have gotten worse. I think we all know that. We've created, as Rob mentioned, a death economy. This is an economy that's based on warfare, on a belief that we have to fight them, or the threat of warfare. That's what our economy in the United States is very dependent on the military. And it's also based on ravaging the earth, destroying the very resources upon which our economy is based. And we understand now, across this planet, that it isn't working. So how did we get to this economy and know that it's time to move into another form, which I'll talk about in a minute? And I'd like to just share my economic hitman story, because I think that tells a lot about this. I have to take quite a bit of responsibility for the situation that we confront today. After I got out of the Peace Corps, I did what business school had taught me to do. I joined a big consulting firm as an economist. And I became an economic hitman. And we do many things, but the generic version of what economic hitmen do is that we'll identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil here in Mexico, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. However, the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in the country, power plants, transmission lines, industrial parks, ports, airports, highways, things that benefit our own corporations big time. They make huge profits off this, and a few wealthy families in the country who own the industries and the commercial centers. But the majority of the people suffer because in trying to pay off the interest on these loans from the World Bank or whatever organization, money is siphoned off of education, healthcare, and other social services. And in the end, the country can't pay the principal. That's part of the plan. And so we go back in and say, hey, since you can't pay your loan, sell your resource, oil, whatever, real cheap to our corporations without any environmental restrictions or social regulations. Vote with us on the next United Nations vote that's important. Allow us to build a military base on your soil. Become part of our empire. It's an empire. It's the world's first truly global empire. It's not an American empire. It's a corporate empire. Because one of the big things we say is privatize. Privatize everything. Sell them to the global corporations. The United States government supports this empire, but it's really not an American empire. Oops. There goes the time. My little reminder. I guess I'm done. Thank you. This podium is really tiny. So, in any case, that's what, and in the few instances where economic hitmen fail, where we can't convince governments to accept these loans, the jackals go in. And these are people that either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. And I talk in the book, The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Don't you like the cover? It's a blank page for you to decide what you want to do with it. No, it has a really nice cover, actually. It just didn't quite make it here, because the book just came out 2 days ago. So, thank you, thank you. So, in that book, which you can buy at the bookstore out here, and I'm happy to sign, that's okay, thank you. In that book, I talk about how two of my clients, Jaime Roldos, the democratically elected president of Ecuador, and Omar Torrijos, head of state of Panama, they wouldn't go along. They wouldn't buy what I was trying to sell them. They would not buy into this concept of destroying their countries, basically, making them slaves. They had integrity, and the jackals went after them. They both were assassinated. And I was very close, particularly to Omar, and it was a tough situation. In the few cases where the jackals also fail, where security is too damn good, like with Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi, then the military goes in. So in this process, we've created an economy that just doesn't work. It's a failure. And I began to discover this, and finally, after 10 years, I had an enlightening moment, which I don't have time to get into right now, but I quit. I'd been chief economist. That was my official title, economic hitman, but I had about 50 people working for me at the time, doing this nefarious work. And then I decided to write a book to expose this. And as I started to write this book, I contacted other people who'd had jobs similar to mine and some of the jackals. And incidentally, we've admitted in the United States about these jackals, about that we took out Allende, of Chile Arbenz of Guatemala, Mossadegh of Iran, Lumumba of the Congo, Diem of Vietnam, many others. This is no secret. It's a fact. We do this in the United States. One of the reasons I write all this is because I don't like the fact we do it. I think we ought to be above all that, don't you? Yes. So anyway, I quit and I started writing this book. And I started contacting jackals and economic hitmen and got anonymous phone calls threatening my life and my daughter's, who was an infant. I took them seriously. I'd seen what the jackals could do. At the same time, the CEO, the chairman of the board of a big consulting firm in Boston, Stone & Webster, competitor of my old firm, took me out to dinner and he said, you've got a great resume. I'd been chief economist of one of his rivals. We'd like to use it in our proposals. You won't have to do any work for us whatsoever. Just let us use your resume. And I'd like to write you a check tomorrow for $500,000, $500,000 as a consultant's retainer. This is 1984 or 85. $500,000 was worth a lot. Just don't write the book. So my life's being threatened and I'm being offered a bribe. It's a legal bribe. It's perfectly legal for him to do this. What would you have done? I took the money. My daughter was very important to me, more important than my life. She's 33 now. But I have to say, in my own defense, I didn't buy a new house, fancy car. I went back to the Amazon, and I went to other places, and I offered to help people that I had screwed in the past. And I started a whole new career. I helped to found the Dream Change, the Pachamama Alliance. How many of you here know about the Pachamama Alliance? All right, and those who don't, you need to go online, pachamama.org. And while you're there, go to johnperkins.org and sign up for my newsletter that comes out once a month. And go to the trips and come with me to Ecuador or to the indigenous people of Colombia or Guatemala. I do 3 different trips every year to those indigenous people. Come! I just came from the Guatemala one. In any case, so I'm starting a new career. I'm writing books. I wrote 5 books on indigenous people. I had this great relationship. I went back to the Amazon and said, I'm here I want to help you people. I want to help save your forest. What can we do to help? And they say, the only way you can help us is to change the dream of your people. Change the story. The indigenous people are dream cultures. They know that whatever we dream, and it's not just nighttime dreams, whatever we give energy to, happens. They say you must change the dream of your people to get away from this death economy, create a new life economy, create a new mindset about being, having a human presence that's environmentally sustainable, socially just, spiritually fulfilling on this planet. And at that time, I took a group of people to northern India and to Ladakh, which used to be part of Tibet, is now an Indian protectorate. And to make a long story short, the Dalai Lama, just at that same time, happened to be reading my book, Shape-Shifting. And we ran into him at an airport. We were all waiting for it. He was carrying that book under his arm. Invited me to sit next to him on the airplane. We had a great discussion. Amongst other things, what's the story about the 14th Dalai Lama, him being the last? And he said that he thinks the next one, she or he, will probably come from the Amazon or the Andes. Maybe. Anyway, that's a longer story. But the one I wanted to say is then he invited our whole group to spend an afternoon in his house in Dharamsala, talking to him in his living room. We were about 30 people. And one of the people in our group asked him, he said, "So, Your Holiness, you know there's a writer in the United States who's advocating that everybody take 5 minutes off on a certain day at noontime or 10 minutes or something and pray for peace. What do you think of that, Your Holiness?" And the Dalai Lama says, "Well, it's very good to pray for peace, meditate on peace, but if that's all you do, it's a waste of time and a distraction. You must take action every single day, some daily appropriate, he loves that word, appropriate action every day of your life to make peace happen." It's a very important message for all of us as we enter this period of changing consciousness. And then, shortly after that, I was in the Amazon with a group of people with the Shuar, learning, connecting with them on 9/11. Afterwards, I flew to New York, and I went to Ground Zero, and as I stood there looking down into that smoldering pit, I knew I had to write the book. I had to confess. But I decided this time I would not contact anybody else. I would do it completely secretly. It would be a private confession, a personal confession, rather than an expose. I did that. I wrote the whole book in secret, gave it to my literary agent, and as you heard earlier, 39 publishers rejected it. But once it was in their hands, it's my insurance policy. It still is, because any self-respecting jackal out there knows that the worst thing they can do to me is kill me. If one of you shoots me after this conference, my publishers will probably be very happy. Book sales will skyrocket. Not really. Book sales will skyrocket. But so the book was my insurance policy. And why have I written this second book, The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman? Because since the first book came out in 2004, things have gotten so much worse. 9/11 happened right after, as I was writing the book. 9/11 is a watershed moment. Since that time, the treacherous cancer that was beneath the surface, then was revealed in the original Confessions of an Economic Hitman, has metastasized. It spread from the economically developing countries to the United States and the rest of the world. It attacks the very foundations of not only democracy, but the entire planet's life support systems. I think we all know that. All the economic and jackal tools, false economics, false promises, threats, bribes, extortion, debt, deception, coups, assassinations, unbridled military power, all of these are used around the world today, even more than during the era when I was an economic hitman and wrote about it in the first book. Fear and debt drive this system. Politicians and the media are constantly hammering us with messages intending to terrify us into believing that we must pay any price, assume any debt to stop the enemies who, we are told, lurk at our doorsteps. The problem comes from somewhere else. Communism, back when I was a kid, insurgents, terrorists, them. They're the problem. And the solution requires spending massive amounts of money on goods and services produced by what I call the corporatocracy. Vast networks of people who lead corporations, banks, colluding governments around the world, and the rich and the powerful people tied to them. And they have produced a totally failed system, this death economy that I mentioned before. And what drives this system are big corporations. It's a corporate economy. And it's all driven by a relatively new story. When I was in business school, I was taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for his investors, but also takes good care of his employees, his suppliers, his consumers, and the communities where he works. Pays taxes, imagine that. And it gives money to the local school system, the recreation centers. The company is a good citizen. All that changed in the 1970s while I was an economic hitman, and Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize by stating, in essence, the only responsibility of a corporation is to maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. That single new policy, and it's new since the 70s, it's a new story, has caused a disaster around the world. A total disaster. And I think, there's many ways to show this, but we know that all living systems are declining at accelerating rates. 62 individuals have as many assets as half the world's population. Last year it was 85, this year it's 62. 70% of the people on this planet live in countries where inequality has grown in the last 30 years. 2.2 billion people live below the poverty line of $2 a day. Billions more live on $3 or $4 a day. And I think one of the statistics that I find most telling is that less than 5% of the world's population lives in the United States, and we consume just about 30% of the world's resources. Is that a model? Can China do that? No. China, Brazil, India, no one else can do that. 5% consuming 30%. China has 19% of the world's population. The numbers don't add up. It's a failure. It's a totally failed system. But let's keep in mind that it's all relatively recent, and it's all caused by mindset, by the story. We must change it. We must listen to the message of the indigenous people and their prophecies that it's now time to move out of this brutal death economy system into a new system, a life economy. And that's really the reason why I write. And I want to encourage all of you to write about this in whatever way you do. Facebook, tweets, whatever you do, books, stories, whatever you do. And let us send the new message out that we can create a life economy. Now, a life economy is based on cleaning up pollution. It's based on telling Monsanto, telling General Dynamics and Raytheon that they no longer can take our money to make military equipment and destroy agricultural lands around the world. That instead we expect them to come up with ways, tools, methods, systems for cleaning up the terribly polluted oceans, lakes and rivers, and land, air. And that we must create new technologies, not just solar and wind for energy, but other ones. New technologies for energy, for transportation, for communications, for banking, for all of our systems. There's a huge economy out there waiting. We don't have to go into a nosedive. We may do that if we don't move in this direction. But the easy thing is change the story. Let's go from a death economy to a life economy. And you're the secret. You're ready to do this, right? Yes. Consciousness revolution. That's where we're at. You know, I just want to say, you have the power. And I speak to forums like this around the world. I've been in China and Romania and Turkey and all over Latin America and the Middle East and Europe and universities in the United States, MBA programs. I spoke recently to a conference of 4,000 CEOs. Everybody's getting it. Our corporations run it. They're driven by this one goal of maximizing profits, but they know that it's not working. That's why they invite me to speak there. And they don't know what to do. CEOs are afraid if they lose 0.5% of market share, they'll be fired. But it's up to you. It's up to us, because all the corporations depend on us to buy their goods and services, to invest in them. The marketplace is a democracy if we'll just use it as that. You know, there was apartheid in South Africa when I was in college. We boycotted corporations that supported it. It went away, pretty much. Our rivers were terribly polluted. In Boston, we couldn't walk beside the Charles. It was so polluted. We forced corporations to clean it up, to open their doors wider to minorities, to women. We forced change. We've got them to change. You have to do it. We have to do it. We, the people, we have to do it, and we can do it. Our leaders will not do it, and in essence, they can't do it. You know, if you really think that whoever gets elected president of the United States next is going to have a huge major influence on the world, think again. Because they're all controlled by big corporations. Unless it's Bernie, someone says. I got to tell you, I love Bernie. Great symbol. But if Bernie's in the White House, the first day he goes in, he's going to be read the Riot Act. And he's going to have to deal with a Congress that's totally beholden to Wall Street. And he's going to have to deal with over 100,000 lobbyists. I love Bernie. But he's not going to do it. You are. And I don't care who gets elected, and in some respects, I mean, I do care. But whoever it is, you've got to go out there and force that person to do the right thing. We have to do it. Whoever gets in the White House, we have to do it. We have to do it. We have to force the corporations to change. You have the power. When I was growing up in rural New Hampshire, I had no idea that African Americans had to ride on the back of a bus until Rosa Parks showed me. How many of you have ever heard of Rosa Parks? Really? Well, who the hell was Rosa Parks? She was a woman who walked near the front of a bus. She did a lot of other things, but that was the big thing. You can do that. And when I grew up in rural New Hampshire, I had no idea that the DDT my dad and I were spraying on the swamp behind our house to kill mosquitoes was also killing birds and fish. Until Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring and changed the world, created a worldwide environmental movement. How many of you have ever heard of Rachel Carson? Who was Rachel Carson? She sat at a little desk in a tiny house in Pennsylvania one day and took up a pencil and a piece of paper, scrap paper, and started to write, having no idea that her book would ever be published, much less that it would change the world. You can do that. A lot of you are writers. You can do that. We all have something that we can do. You have the power. We have the power. And how many of you have heard of Richard Davis, Jack Woodbury, Mrs. Schneer? San Miguel de Allende. Well, Richard Davis and Jack Woodbury were my prep school English and history teachers. Mrs. Schneer was my third grade teacher. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. I wouldn't have ever written a book. Jack and Richard taught me the power of the written word for changing the world. History teacher, English teacher. Mrs. Schneer taught me there was a terrible bully in my class in third grade. He kept picking on me, and she couldn't do much, kick him out of school, but he had to come back because in the state of New Hampshire, you had to stay in school till you were 16. So finally she says to me, Johnny, you're just going to have to do this. Whoa. yourself. And she said, here's my suggestion. Next time he pushes you, you just kick him in the shins and knock off his microphone, and that'll serve him. That'll teach him, by God. Without a microphone, what can that guy do, you know? So I did. I give a lot of talks, and you can imagine the number of things that can go wrong around the world when you're speaking. You learn to adjust. So I kicked him in the shins and ran like hell. And it did an amazing thing. You know, he whimpered. And then he became my buddy, my ally. So I learned that the way we take care of bullies is to stand up to them. We got to stand up to the corporatocracy. Are you ready to stand up to the corporatocracy? Are you really ready? All right. You have the power. Now, in this book, The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, I take a bold step, and I have a whole lot of lists of things people can do. Retired people, students, people in between student and retired, everybody, corporate executives, investors. There are all these lists. I encourage you to read them and pick some things. Follow what the Dalai Lama said. You know, take an action every single day. Maybe it's as simple as sending an email to a bunch of people. Maybe it's as complex as going out in the streets and demonstrating and being thrown in jail. But follow your passion. Pick an organization. Monsanto, Walmart, Nike, I don't care, Exxon. Pick an organization and go after them. And tell them you want to do them a service. And get all your friends on Facebook and email, and get them all to write emails to these people, to these organizations. Tell them, I love your, Nike, I love your shoes, but I'm not buying them again until, and none of my friends are, until you pay your workers in Indonesia, your slaves, a fair wage. It has an impact. I don't know what your passions are, each one of you out there. I know each one of you has passion. And I know you have skills. I don't know what they are. I have a passion for writing and hopefully some skill in doing it. I don't know what yours are, but I know you have passion and I know you have skills. And if you're retired, as I think a few of you are, you can't be fired. So what are you waiting for? How much tennis can you play, you know? This is fun. When I was an economic hitman, I thought I was living the great life, traveling first class around the world. A poor kid from New Hampshire, staying in the best hotels, eating in the finest restaurants, whining and dining with presidents, and loading myself with Valium and alcohol. I thought it was what I was supposed to want. This is fun. I can't tell you how much I enjoy being here with you. And the next place I go, I'm not even sure where, I think it's New York after this thing my publishers finally got. And incidentally, it wasn't just Susan's obstinance. That was part of it, but I too wanted to be here, and I let my publishers know. Susan did a lot, but I did my share. And I got to say, this is an awful lot better than New York at this time of year. So if you're writers, write, but do something every single day. You know, the Dalai Lama advised us to take action every day. Follow his advice. Another great writer, Graham Greene, one of my favorite writers, a great novelist. I worshipped him back many years ago and had the good fortune of having brunch with him in a hotel in Panama one morning. The whole story's in the book. But Graham Greene said, you know, to be a writer, you got to write every day. And you got to live every day. He said, I write 500 words every day and then I go out and live. But he said the most important thing, and I'm quoting him here, the most important thing is to write about things that matter. He wrote novels, but every one of them was about the injustices in Argentina or Haiti or someplace else in the world. Mexico, one of his great novels, took place here in Mexico during the Revolution. Fantastic, right? He always wrote about things that mattered. And don't get discouraged. Rob mentioned 39 rejections. Imagine getting 39 rejection letters, bang, but you keep going. So I really want to encourage each and every one of you, identify your passion and your skills, follow it, but do something every single day. We can all take different paths. If you're a carpenter, you can build with sustainable materials and keep telling the people you're building with them. If you're a dentist, when your client's in the chair, talk them into a new story. If you're a writer, write about these things. Tie it in with your novel, your memoirs, whatever it is. Bring it in. Tie it in. Let's do something. Let's change the world. Blogs, newsletters, I don't care. There's so incredibly much that every one of us can do. And it's also really important to support amazing organizations like Caminos de Agua here locally. Get behind these organizations. They need your help, and you need them. It feels so good when you contribute to a cause. And I got to say, this is the most blessed time in history to be alive. Growing up in New Hampshire, my ancestors fought in the American Revolution. I used to say, I wish I'd been born in the 1700s so I could have participated in that revolution. This is bigger. This is a global revolution. This is much bigger, and it's a hell of a lot more comfortable. The toilets are better. We can take these different paths. And I'm often think about in the American Revolution, how thankful we must be that George Washington didn't write pamphlets. Tom Paine didn't try to lead men in armies. Washington had a passion and talent for leading armies. Paine had a passion and talent for writing pamphlets. Martha Washington had a passion and talent for organizing women to make clothes for the people at the forefront. If you think of any of your heroes out there, think of a hero, any of your personal heroes, Mother Teresa, Gandhi, whoever. They started not having any idea they were going to be successful. We can all do this. It's a powerful time. And in the case of Washington, George, Martha, and Tom Paine, they all took very different paths, but they headed for the same destination, getting out from under the British yoke. If every one of you takes your own path, if we all take our own paths, but we head for the same destination of creating an environmentally sustainable, socially just, spiritually fulfilling human presence on this planet, turning a death economy into a life economy, we will get there. Are you prepared to do this? Yes. Are you going to enjoy the hell out of it? Yes. This is fun. Okay, are you really ready? Yes. Thank you. So I'm just about to bring this to a close, and maybe we have a little time for some questions, and hopefully somebody has answers to any questions that get raised here. But I just want to end by saying, I want to make a quote, but just before I do, I want to just say just what a great honor it is to be here with all of you, to be at this illustrious Writers' Conference. I'm so delighted, and thank you so much for having me here. I so appreciate it. Please remember to go to johnperkins.org, sign up for my newsletters, and come with me on one of these amazing trips to really get into the spirituality of the indigenous people. And now I just want to end with this quote. Now, this is an old quote. It's a couple hundred years old, but I think it's still very relevant. George Washington had lost every battle he fought, just about. Continental Congress wouldn't give him anything. Shoes, no. Blankets, no. Guns, no. Ammunition, no. He's bogged down in Valley Forge. Seems hopeless. But he doesn't give up, And along comes Tom Paine. December 1776, and this is relevant today, I think. Paine writes, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he or she who stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. If there must be trouble, let it be in my day, that my child may have peace. If there must be trouble, let it be in our day, that our children may have peace. Paine goes on to say, I love the man or woman who can smile in trouble, who can gather strength from distress and grow brave by reflection. By perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious future. And so I think that's why we're all here today. All of you, we're here today because you and I, together, are going to have the perseverance and fortitude to create a glorious future, to transform a death economy into a life economy. I'm so honored to be part of this and to join you in this beautiful dance to create that glorious future. Thank you so very, very much. Thank you. 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 Thank you so much. I've just been told we have 15 minutes for some of you to ask some questions and others to answer them. This lady has a microphone, so I'll just let the people with microphones find somebody. We've got somebody over here. Great. Thank you.
While you were talking, I've had this idea, and I think it might be a good idea, that all corporate charters ought to include the Hippocratic Oath. So that's something I wanted to share.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. You know, we need new corporate charters. I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's important. Oh, so the comment was that all corporate charters ought to include the Hippocratic Oath to do service. And I think that it's important for us to realize, I don't know how many people are from the United States, but it certainly has an influence on the world. And I think it's important to realize that for the first 100 years, the United States was a nation. No corporation could get a charter in any state unless it demonstrated that it was going to serve a public interest. And it didn't have to say anything about profits. And on average, a corporate charter lasted for 10 years, and then the corporation had to go back and show that it had served a public interest and promised to continue to do so if it was to continue to get a charter. That all ended in the late 1800s when John D. Rockefeller convinced the state of Delaware to change that, and then the state of New Jersey, and it's gotten worse and worse, and now we know corporations have this terrible designation of being, have the rights but not the responsibilities of individuals. But in the United States, we have an incredible precedent for saying the job of corporations is to serve us, the public. Make a decent rate of return for your investors. We need investors. We need to come up with new systems for water, for sewage, for energy, for all these technologies that will help us move into a life economy. But more than anything, these corporations need to take an oath to only get a charter if they are committed to serving a public interest, to not only being sustainable. And in this idea of a sustainable, environmentally sustainable, we also need to include, and I forgot this word because it's fairly new, but it's in my book, regenerative. We can't just sustain, we've got to regenerate areas that have been devastated. So these corporations need to take that oath. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Appreciate it. We got a mic over here.
Since the original Confessions of an Economic Hitman, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, can you give us an update about the countries in the world right now, the countries that are operating under these austerity budgets? Is this the same process that's going on?
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, as I said, and the book goes into a lot of detail about how really what the system that we developed in the 70s has come home to roost. The United States, Europe, I mean, Rob read a quote from the former finance minister of Greece, I mean, all of Europe's going through this, and of course, we know what's going on in the Middle East, South America. I've watched the president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, PhD in economics, a personal friend of mine, I call him that anyway, and he wrote an endorsement for one of my books. He's had to give in to these corporate interests, to the hitman. He said that. He's had to give in order to keep his job. And he knows that if he gets taken out, a much worse person's going to come along. So yes, it's going on all over the world. And I talk a lot about many of the countries in the book, but you can count on any country that has resources, including labor and markets, is falling under the influence today. It's gotten worse, but at the same time, this tide of consciousness is sweeping the planet. So we've really got two tidal waves. We've got a tidal wave of consciousness, us, and a tidal wave that's setting in to stop it, because the status quo wants to keep the status quo even if they know it's not working. Every corporate executive that I know, all of the ones I know, and I think probably all of them, they're smart people. They know that the space shuttle we're on, this tiny, fragile planet, is headed toward disaster, and if it crashes, they're going to go with it. So they're getting it. And yet they're setting in because they don't know what else to do. So we get these two tidal waves, and you and I need to really push this consciousness revolution tidal wave and let them know we're there to help them move into something new. I'm often struck by how during the time when city-states became nations, most people didn't get it. Most businesses didn't get it. The Medici got it. They said it's not enough to have a bank in Florence. We need one in Venice, and we need one in Paris and in Geneva. And they were incredibly successful. We're at one of these times now where business executives need to be told, and many of them are really waking up to the fact that we're moving into a new era. You can't go on with an economy that destroys the resources upon which it depends. Duh. The Mayas tried out here in the Yucatan Peninsula in the Petén, where I go every year and work with Mayan shamans about this. It didn't work. It's not going to work. They get it. But we've got to help them understand that we are going to support them, and because they're afraid of losing market share and their jobs and being replaced by someone much worse. But there's a lot more about that in the book, and I can't go into much more detail now, but well, the World Bank and the IMF are involved, but now we've got the Chinese banks involved too. That's another whole story, what China's doing and following in that direction. We've got that to deal with now too. So, and Wall Street, the most powerful single institution or a group of institutions on this planet is Wall Street. Yeah, the Supreme Court has not been helping us much, has it, recently? But we, the people, can change that. We get somebody with a microphone someplace?
I have a question over here. John?
Where's over here?
Yep.
Oh, hi. We're going to the left now.
Okay. That would be right.
Left.
My question is, do you think that NAFTA and this upcoming fight over the TPP have any relationship to the, the struggles that you were part of in previous years?
Well, yes. We know that the so-called immigration problem in the United States is caused by CAFTA and NAFTA. Destruction of economies in Central America. And I deal with that a lot in the book. There's a lot of detail about how that works. TTP will be disastrous for everybody except the big corporations. And, these are setups for making corporations sovereign, more sovereign than they already are. Under TPP, every corporation will have the right to sue any country that in any way interferes with them making profits. They become more sovereign than the sovereign states. And that's part of this global corporate empire. We need to stop these things. Yes, that's absolutely part of the system. Thank you for bringing that up. And again, I'd love to go into more detail, and I do in the book. I really get into that. It's a pet peeve. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Perkins. Thank you so much for being here.
John.
John. What an honor.
Thank you.
My question is, which are the countries that are the best models of a life-based economy that we can investigate and try to emulate?
It's a really good question. It's a hard one to answer. there's little samples around. So I was recently in Aruba meeting with the prime minister there because Aruba only drinks seawater. They have reverse osmosis plants that run the water through big coral tanks, so it remineralizes the water. It's the best water I've ever tasted in my life. And they drink the ocean. And this is a technology that I've been encouraging them to take out to the rest of the world. New York City needs it. Probably Mexico City. I don't know where they can get you can pipe it up. But, I mean, the world needs these technologies. In some of the Latin American countries are taking tremendous leadership roles in democracy. You know, after Chavez stood up to the, whatever you think of Chavez, he stood up to the U.S. in 2002 when there was a coup against him. He made it. He was smart enough to outsmart the CIA. And afterwards, Bush didn't do anything, partly because he was overextended in the Middle East and probably didn't figure he could do anything, and partly because the oil company said, you know, we may need that oil because we may lose the Middle East oil. So watch out, stay away from Venezuela. Whatever happened, after that, 10 other countries in Latin America became democracies. And yeah, congratulations. Ecuador and Bolivia and Chile and Argentina and Brazil and on and on and on. So this huge democratic movement, and it's you know, it's been watered down to some degree, but there's been this huge movement. So, and I think if we look at many of the European countries, the Northern European, especially the Northern European countries, as to the way they deal with retirement, as to the way they deal with healthcare, there's many separate models around. I don't think we can find any one country that's really doing it perfectly, but there's a lot of good models. And I think what's important, how many of you here consider yourself to be from or connected to the United States? Well, that's a lot. And I think what you need to realize, and even if you've living full-time here and you've separated yourself, understand that the United States is still the world leader. Everybody looks to us. China's rapidly taking over, but we've still got a shot. We're out there. And the best thing we can do, if you don't like what China's doing in the world, get the United States to create a new model. That China then can say, well, geez, we got to do it that way too. What we need to do is do so good in the world with our form of democracy and capitalism, a capitalism that is totally dedicated to serving a public interest, and that's not contrary to capitalism. It's contrary to the current form of capitalism. It's not contrary to capitalism. We need to create a model that sets a new standard for the world that says we are the corporations, and the United States is the country that will support the corporations that will create a life economy. And I guarantee you, China will have to follow. We need to create that new model. Thanks. Somebody else? I think we've got time for one more.
Yeah, hi. I'm a big Bernie Sanders supporter, but I look at his foreign policy and I see that he's not really taking on the empire, and I'm sure there are very good reasons for that. Wants to stay alive, for one thing. But it seems to me that whatever we're going to do really can and has to be done internationally. And I wondered what your thoughts were about, now that we have this internet that really connects everybody in the world, what is the potential for really serious international organizing? Because the multinationals are themselves, as their name implies, international.
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, and getting back to the presidency, I think one thing in the United States, I think one thing we need to recognize is presidents and all leaders are very, very vulnerable today. You know, back in Kennedy's day, everybody knew he was having affairs. He was the president of Nike. His main publicist is a very, very, very good friend of mine. But by the time Clinton came along, you could impeach a president. Dan Wyden of Wyden basically Kennedy. Assassinate him politically. I've taken Dan to the Amazon twice. And I think what we need to understand is, and Martin Parker, you know, whoever gets in the White House, CEO any major arena, Nike, can be taken down. Says he wants to be green. Most everybody's got a skeleton. He wants to leave a green legacy for future generations. And he says that he knows that he loses half a percentage of market share, Phil Knight will get him fired. And can make some decisions, yes. So what he wants, and he's asked me, tell these people out there, as you're speaking to them, that he wants to be flooded with emails. They're going to be brought down that say, so you have to do it. Your product. We have to do it. But I won't buy anymore. You have to be the one until you pay your, you know that, don't you, Shea? Hundreds of thousands of these come in, he can take them. not
to
going to let
Phil
you
Knight
off
and say,
easy.
Phil, these are our customers.
And the
We've gotta
internet,
listen.
that's a great,
I've
what
heard
a
similar
great,
stories
what a great tool
from
we've got here
CEOs
to
presidents
organize
of
consumer
many
movements, which are
organizations
so
out there.
important.
They
and so
need
powerful.
you.
And I got to say,
They need
so
us.
here's an example. I happen
Most
to
of them
know
want to do the
a
right
lot
things.
about
Even the
Mark Parker,
sociopaths
who's
who
the
don't give a
president of
damn
Nike,
about
and
doing the
his
right
main,
thing will do the right
publicist is a
thing if
very,
we
very,
force
very
them
good friend
to.
of mine,
If
and
we
he
say the
confirmed
only
that
way
he
you're going to
got a key
stay
to
in
just
that
do it,
job
Dan
is by
White
doing
and
the right
Martin
thing,
Kennedy.
they'll do it. I'm so
Dan to the
reminded
Amazon
of
twice.
a story,
And
which
he's
is
a very
true,
good friend.
of Franklin
And
Roosevelt
Mark
during
Parker,
his last years in
president of
office,
CEO
met with the
of,
heads of the auto unions.
Nike.
And as they were
Says he
leaving
wants
his
to be
office and
green.
shaking hands with
He
them,
wants
says,
to leave a
"You know, I
green
think you
legacy
guys
for
understand now
for future
that I'm
generations.
totally with you.
And he says that he
Now you
knows
gotta
if he
go out
loses
there and
half a
force me to
percentage of
do the
market
right
share,
thing.
Phil Knight will get him fired.
We need to do that.
So what
We-
he wants, and he's asked me,
time?
tell these people out there as you're speaking to them, that he wants to be flooded with emails that say, I love your products, but I won't buy any more until you pay your workers a fair share. Hundreds of thousands of these come in. He can take them to Phil Knight and say, Phil, these are our customers. We've got to listen. I've heard similar stories from CEOs and presidents of many, many organizations out there. They need you. They need us. Most of them want to do the right things. Even the sociopaths who don't give a damn about doing the right thing will do the right thing if we force them to. If we say the only way you're going to stay in that job is by doing the right thing, they'll do it. I'm so reminded of a story
Thank you, yes.
of Franklin Roosevelt during his last years
Yeah.
in office,
And-
with the heads of the auto
And
unions.
what you also
And as
need
they were
to know
leaving
is
his
that it
office
is
and
not
shaking
enough to
hands
elect
with him, and he says,
a very
you know, I think you guys
progressive
understand now. I'm
president
totally
or
with
prime
you.
minister.
Now you got to go
people
out there
must
and
force
keep
me to
pushing,
do the
and
right
that's what
thing.
we got to understand.
Not
We need to
be
do that.
distracted
We-
by whoever
we
gets
out of
into the
time?
White House. Let's force that person, whoever it is, he or she, to do the right thing, to create a life economy. Thank you so very, very much.
Absolutely for environmental friendliness. We are your friends. We are your neighbor to the north. And I'm telling you right now, we have 32 million people in our country that are poised for a massive amount of change. The same change that you've been telling us about. United States of America, we are Canada to the north, Mexico. You are our neighbors to the south. We are Canadians, and we have embarked upon a journey that is it absolutely is importantly standing in defiance of the rest of the world's governments.
Thank you, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, and what you also need to know is that it is not enough to elect a very progressive president or prime minister. The people must keep pushing, and that's what we got to understand. Not be distracted by whoever gets into the White House. Let's force that person, whoever it is, he or she, to do the right thing, to create a life economy. Thank you so very, very much.